Time for number 95 on my Best Picture Marathon. Best Picture Marathon theme song. Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, known collectively as Daniels, have begun researching the complicated concept of the multiverse as early as 2010. They were disheartened when Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse came along and beat them to the punch. Before long, there were tons of Marvel and DC movies dealing with the concept of the multiverse. But Daniels kept working on their film, which eventually became Everything Everywhere All at Once. A wild and crazy multiverse movie that ended up becoming very successful at the box office and went on to win a whole bunch of Oscars, including Best Picture. The film was released by A24 in 2022, and it stars Michelle Yeoh in a role that was originally written for Jackie Chan. But Daniels decided to gender swap it and turn it into Evelyn, a middle-aged Chinese immigrant working at a laundromat with her husband Wayman and their daughter Joy. The movie's wild and crazy plot is a little difficult to explain. It involves hopping from one universe into another, characters learning skills from alternate versions of themselves, and ultimately having to face off against a nihilistic villain that hits a little too close to home for Evelyn. The film blends absurdist comedy, slapstick, martial arts action, science fiction, fantasy, and even animation to deal with things like generational trauma, mental health, complicated family dynamics, and the struggles of immigrant families in the US. Michelle Yeoh became the first Malaysian performer to win a Best Actress Oscar. Evelyn's husband Wayman is played by Ke Huy, who audiences may remember as the child star of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and The Goonies. Kwan had stepped away from acting for decades because of the lack of good roles for Asian actors in Hollywood movies, but after the success of Crazy Rich Asians, which also featured Michelle Yeoh, Kwan returned to acting, and the timing was perfect for him to do this film. He landed his first Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Interestingly, Kwan would go on to appear in another multiverse story, the second season of Marvel's Loki TV series. The film also features former Scream Queen Jamie Lee Curtis as a grumpy IRS agent. Curtis won her first Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for this role, and Evelyn's father is played by the venerable James Hong, who's been in more than 600 movies and TV shows throughout his very long career. Everything Everywhere All at Once is a pretty crazy movie and has some wild special effects, but after being frustrated with the effects department on their previous film, Swiss Army Man, Daniels chose to work with a small 8-person effects team on this movie. It's pretty incredible what that little team pulls off. I really like this movie. I think it's a lot of fun. I do think some of the narrative beats get a bit repetitive during the second half, and certain aspects of the resolution feel a little muddled to me. But overall, it's a really fun, funny, very visceral and kinetic movie. Terrific performances down the line, wonderful production design, and a far more creative and inventive take on the multiverse concept than just about anything Marvel and DC movies have done so far. But that's just my opinion. Once again, there were a lot of terrific movies nominated for Best Picture for 2022. My favorite movie of the year was probably Todd Field's Tar, starring Cate Blanchett, but I wasn't upset about Everything Everywhere All at Once winning Best Picture. As I've said before, I do enjoy it when these really out-of-left-field crazy movies beat some of the more safe Oscar choices. So hey, good for them. P.S. Hollywood, please keep casting Ke Huy Quan and stuff. He just seems like the most delightful person, and I love watching him on screen. Alright, next up, Oppenheimer. See you then.